Hello, everyone, and welcome to Take Two. You didn't see Take One, that was just the rehearsal of Slate Against the Machine, where we're pulling back the curtain on the film industry, giving emerging and underrepresented filmmakers the tools to get started and thrive. And today we're talking about Rule of Three, producing. What is it? And our guest this week, amazing guest, live from New York, Rikers Island, Harvey Weinstein. No, that would be reprehensible. He is neither underrepresented nor is he a producer. He does not get the benefit of multiple.
He is. Well, the funny thing is, so I teach production management at York, and we were talking about Christine Vachon. So we're reading Christine Vachon's book, Shooting to Kill. Christine Vachon is definitely a capital P producer. And she was recounting in the book, there's a chapter about it goes day by day on Velvet Goldmine. And on like day 12 or something like that, basically, she gets a call from Miramax, and it's like, Harvey Weinstein's getting on a plane. He's going to fly to London, and he's going to come do a set visit. He's coming tomorrow, basically. So she's like waiting for Harvey Weinstein to show up because he's the distributor on the film. The next day in the diary, it's like, plane was empty. Harvey Weinstein didn't show up. He didn't get on the plane, but he missed his flight, basically. And never showed up on set to do a set visit, basically. So I'm with my students and I'm quizzing them to see if they read the chapter. And I'm like, who didn't get on the plane to London? And like crickets. No one read the book. Finally, someone's like, was it Harvey Weinstein? And I was like, yes. And then I was like, wait a second. Does anyone here know who Harvey Weinstein is? And they were like, he's like the sex guy, right? And I'm like, yes. And he also like produced a whole bunch of like films that made up our entire cinematic like language, especially in the art house independent world. And they were like,
for sure. That's not the headline anymore, though.
No, I know, but like,
these Gen like, hey, remember Cosby, America's Dad? No,
he's been eclipsed.
But then I show them. I'm like, these are the films: like Aviator,
Pulp Fiction,
all of Tarantino's films, Good Will Hunting. Like, it's like these are all, and they're like, he did that. I'm like, my goodness, film history. Anyways,
who are you? And let the audience know who you are. We have not done introductions yet.
Well, why start with me? Who are you? Who are you? Who's the man in the bottom right corner of my screen? He has a poster for Runs in the Family behind him. He himself is a producer extraordinaire.
According to his Gmail email address.
Yes. Je m'appelle Shant Joshi. Je suis le producteur. Je ne parle pas. I'm learning French on Duolingo. My name is Shant Joshi. I am El Presidente, not of Venezuela, but certainly, it's an open job for anyone who wants to take it. But I'm president of Fae Pictures. Leonard, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Leonard Chan. I'm the director of development at Fae Pictures, and I am very excited to finally find out what a producer does.
Here to try and answer like maybe a fifth of those questions. I'm Lindsay Blair Goldner. I'm the VP of production at Fae Pictures, so I oversee physical production. And I think I know what a producer is. I hope I know kind of what a producer does. I feel like I do it sometimes, so very happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Abdul. Shant's my boss. Technically, I'm VP of development. Don't email me. Please email Leonard. So let's start off in the most simplest of terms because, producers, nobody likes them. Everyone needs them. That's not even true. There's a lot of good producers, like the two in this call with us, who will now tell us what producers do. Lindsay, why don't you tee us off?
Well, so if the question is, what does a producer do? I think my first response would be to say a producer is the person responsible for making the project happen, like making sure it exists, right? We think of the director as like the creative mind behind a project. The producer is someone who actualizes that creative vision. So they a producer should oversee a project from its initial idea to its release. And that can be creatively, financially, logistically. And, if something goes wrong, the producer either fixes it or finds the person who can. So they're like the person who truly makes the film, I think.
So if, a director might disagree with you, as would a writer, actor.
They would.
Editor, yeah. Like, if you were working in, say, a restaurant, what role would the producer be analogous to? Would they be the owner, the waiter, the server, the chef? Like, what's the easy equivalent?
I think so. There's a differentiation between the title as it relates to, let's say, the Hollywood studio system versus the independent system, and even there's a lot of in between. But I guess we'll start with the Canadian system. A producer, generally, not always, like every producer has different roles and stuff like that. But an owner would be the closest, I guess, in the sense of they have a full view on the whole business. They're looking at the profit and loss. They're looking at, how much money is coming in revenue wise. How are they spending the money? They're signing the checks for payroll. They're signing the requisition forms to get the next round of beef or chicken or whatever that needs to come to the restaurant, etc. So they're the ones who are sort of like making sure everything happens and ultimately managing the money. And that I would say that's across the board. Even in the studio system, they're the ones managing the money. But in the studio system, the studios own the project. The producers are the ones who manage it from a producing standpoint. And the thing is, I oftentimes, when I try to explain it with people who are not in the film industry, they're like, "Oh, you're like a project manager." And it's like, yes and no, because a project manager at a company, generally answers to some sort of CEO or that kind of thing. But oftentimes in producing can be a little bit of project managing and being a CEO and being president and like all those kind of things. And then it's like, well, isn't the director the CEO? And it's like, yes, well, not actually. Like in terms of creative, so you could say if a company has a chief creative officer, that would be the director ultimately, someone who's.
I think I can simplify it for you even, Sean.
Sure.
It's like if you eat at a really nice meal and you go to the person who cooked it, that's a chef, and you say, "I'm going to open a restaurant and you're going to be my chef." That's a producer-director relationship. But then you, as the owner of the restaurant, you're not the one putting up the money. You go to the bank, you find the money, you get investors, you put investors in. Like the producer might be the owner. That doesn't mean that they're the one with the bank account. They're the one in charge of filling the bank account so that the restaurant can start and run and operate, and the director.
But they may not have the personal financing. They will have to find the financing. Exactly.
Yeah, especially in Canada. And I feel like maybe later in this call we can talk about what US capital P producers are, because it's a very different assumption, especially when you're talking to creatives about what a producer should do. But I'm curious if you guys like this other analogy, because I've talked about producing to like people who truly have no knowledge of the film industry, and I've kind of likened it to like a conductor, like for an orchestra, where like you're not the creative lead, you're not the person who wrote the music, right? That would be the creative lead, the writer, the director, but you're like, you bring together a group of people to, perform, to put this together. So it's almost like, but the difference is with the conductor, like they're front facing, and producers, you generally never know who they are. They're like in the shadows and often neglected in terms of credit and awards, but it's okay. I think it has a lot to do with like, it's more of a behind the scenes roles than people think based on, I think, what's...
I'm sorry, they're neglected for awards?
Well, in the sense,
the best picture
on an indie scale,
the producer.
One award.
But It's one award, and that's
the
it.
award. It is
the award, but also look at historically what kind of producers get those awards, right? Like independent producers are a very unacknowledged, overshadowed bunch, generally speaking.
Yeah,
I'm not talking about the studio guys. People conflate the idea of a big, studio producer with like a small indie producers all the time, and it's like it's a completely different beast. Of course, I'd love to grow up and get an Oscar one day. Who wouldn't? But that's like, the unicorn among us gets to that level.
Some producers win Oscars. Some producers have Oscar-themed birthday parties.
Die in obscurity. Yeah. Or maybe they get a CSA nomination, I will say, it's not to say that, like, again, with just the conductor analogy, producers are just not forward-facing people with the exception of the Oscars, right? Generally speaking, if you ask a film lover, who's your favorite film producer? I think it'll take them a while to say anything. But if you ask someone, well, who's your favorite film director or even writer, there's maybe a better chance they have answers to that than who's your favorite producer.
Scott Rudin, though. I will. So there's sort of two things to this that I think are really interesting that you brought up, Lindsay. The first one is there's like producers who are mega producers who are the guys who like win Oscars and go to awards shows. There's like producers in the indie side, but it's interesting because I think it's really hard for people to bullshit that they're a director because you're like, well, what have you directed? But like in film school especially, and even now, fuck film school, like now, you meet a lot of people, I'm not going to name names, Shant, don't worry, who are like, I'm a producer, and you can like look at them and be like, what does that mean to you? It's such a like vague job, and like, are they producing? And a lot of times they might not even be able to tell you like the differences between various levels of producing, as an example, right?
I have producer credits. I don't know what I did to get them.
We'll get to we'll really admit that later, because producing in TV is very different. Like producer credits in television are like, you have to divorce them from producer credits on feature films. They are the producer role in television is mostly a creative credit, not a production credit. So you'll watch a movie and you'll see 19 different producers. The movie comes up, you'll see 15 different title cards because it's a European art film for different production companies and grants. And then the overture will play Daniel Bloomberg, and then you will get your intro titles with your producer credits. And you'll see them in a very specific order, right? You'll see associate producer, creative producer, executive producer, and then producer. Let's start with sort of the lower level ones. What is an associate, creative, and line producer do, and what are the differences in those jobs?
Well, it's a great delineation, because I think, like you said, a lot of people claim the role of producer, but these different titles are really quite different. So I'm just going to speak about film, like narrative film. I guess this applies to documentary, etc. This is the world that I work in. Associate producer is more like a support role. There was some logistics they probably helped with. Sometimes it's given to a favor, someone who's helped with financing, but maybe they're not someone who's directly related to the production of the project. So definitely less decision-making power with an associate producer credit. For instance, I was given an associate producer credit for lending a location to someone for free for their movie, so it can be varying levels of that. I've also been given an associate producer credit because I helped fix all the paperwork associated with the talent contracts after a film was completed. So I was given like an AP credit after a film was done. So it depends on the role, but it's a smaller, less decision-making power. A line producer, it's something that a lot of us producers do, as well as being the capital P producer, which we'll get to later. A line producer, just like very simple, runs the budget and the schedule, in charge of the budget. To line out a budget, the line producer, so you're in charge of the production team. Line producer hires most of the people on set, the production manager, production coordinator, all the keys, along with the director. It's not so much a creative position, it can be, but they are on set, they are on the ground, and it's an operational role. And then I think you mentioned the other one, like a co-producer, a supervising producer, also not a role. Go ahead.
I would add that line producer, if we're using Shant's analogy, is actually the project manager.
Yes, exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
if the AD is like the day-to-day manager, the the line
Mhm.
producer is the person in the back who's like checking in with the manager, making sure everything's like inventory's up, everything's sort of running smoothly, all that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They'll
And they
yell at you if you
speak
spend too
to-
much money.
Exactly. They
Yes.
always have to kind of speak to their producer or EP. Like they're not the final call on things. 100%.
And that's the thing is you'll oftentimes have line producers being like, well, we can't afford this. Like, I looked at the budget, I can't find the money. And then the producer has to sometimes step in and be like, well, creatively, we need this to happen. So I'm going to go into the budget and I'm going to look for something and I'm going to be like, you know what? I, as the producer, I'm going to just cut this, or I, as the producer, I'm going to say, we're going to put this on our contingency budget and spend it this way because we need to spend it this way. And in some cases, the producer is like, no, we need to cut down, like, we should cut a day or we should do this. But generally, the producer, capital P producer, is a creative role in trying to work the creative vision into the financial situation that you have.
Yeah, I would call that capital P producer they're like the hands-on lead. Like they develop the project usually, maybe they own or they start the like SPV, the single purpose vehicle company that runs the project. But yeah, they are a creative.
Which is the company that owns the project, right?
The company that owns the project, exactly. So the capital P producer, if you see in the credits like produced by or just producer, that's the producer. Everyone else, co-producer, associate producer, executive producer, we can talk about EP. Those are kind of not as, they are not the lead role. Executive producer, though, is like responsible for more like high level oversight. They're usually involved with like financing, packaging, maybe attaching talent, but they are not the hands-on lead producer. And it's often something that you'll see give to actors who bring, audience to film. So like Brad Pitt gets a lot of EP credits on his films, etc.
Yeah. One thing I'll add is that the capital P producer, just like many other producer roles, has found its own level of dilution in this industry. When let's say someone of prominence, like let's say Margot Robbie or some big, like some star that like their production company found the script and found the studio and put it together, but they're not the ones really running the business. Sometimes they don't even know what's happening with the business of the production, other than just like, send me the cost report and I'll look at it, but I won't even know what I'm looking at sometimes. And so in these kind of situations, because they will be like, no, I want a capital P producer credit because I helped set it up and I'm like part of the producing team. In these kind of situations, the Producers Guild of America has sort of stepped in and created the PGA mark. Now, it's different than other marks you'll see, like, for example, like the Casting Society of America mark, or the Cinematographer Society of America, or the Cinematographer Society of Canada. These kind of marks that are associated with membership in a specific association or society. Even if you're a member of the Producers Guild of America, it does not entitle you to a PGA mark. So it's unique in that way, where the PGA decided that in order to help identify who was the actual producer, the capital P producer that was part of the decision-making process of the business of the production, they'll only bestow the PGA mark on those people. So a production will go through a process where anyone who gets a producer credit fills out a form that says, what did you actually do on this production? And fill it out honestly. And it'll also reach out to different crew members, the director and stuff like that. It'll be random. And they'll reach out to them and be like, what did this producer actually do? And then off of that, they will deliberate, and then they will they will make a decision. And it's really hard to appeal it, but they will make a decision and they'll say, okay, these people will get a PGA mark and these people won't. And then even though maybe there's like 6 people with a capital P producer credit, there's maybe only like 2 people with a PGA mark, which identifies that they were the actual capital P producers.
So I think one thing that's important to mention is that producers do have like final say over hiring and firing. They have final say over a lot of things. Like the reason some actors or directors, never writers because we're treated like fucking shit, get like take out producer credits is because it's a way to protect them or for them to have greater creative decision making in the process, right? Like Margot Robbie in Wuthering Heights, probably had a lot more say as a producer than she would have as just an actor for hire, as an example, right?
Yeah.
Producers hold liability. That's the biggest thing. Is like they are liable for safety. They're liable for a lot of things, right?
It's relative. I mean, for example, like Alec Baldwin was a producer on Rust and was charged because he got a producer credit. But there's a thing called courtesy credits. So people will get capital P produce. Like, this is what we're talking about with the PGA mark, right? You may get a capital P producer credit, but that may not necessarily mean you actually do anything or have decision making authority. You may get a courtesy credit as gratitude for the sweat equity that you're putting into the project. So writers, directors sometimes get producer credits as well, even though maybe in some cases, they may not have the final decision making. The decision making comes down to the corporation that is producing the production company. And the people that get credits may not necessarily have any ownership stake in that company. And if you have no ownership stake in the company, you have no decision-making authority. You may have certain approval rights that are contracted to you, but ultimately the final say goes with the owners of the production company.
If Alec Baldwin didn't have a producer credit on Rust, would he not have been charged for shooting somebody?
It certainly helped paint a picture that he, as a producer, should have had a greater duty of care, because there was a larger. It wasn't just the fact that the shot was fired. It was the fact that there was an on-set culture of relaxation around the fact that there was real ammunition on set, and the fact that Alec Baldwin, as a producer, whether courtesy or not, should have taken on the responsibility as someone getting a producer credit to address these kinds of matters when crew members are calling out the production and saying this is an unsafe environment.
So I think now's a good time for like Leonard. Let's talk about TV producing, because like you'll see a lot of the similar credits in TV and feature films, but they mean, with obviously some overlap, they mean a lot of different things. Whereas a lot of producer credits in TV be very similar to film, where you'll have like the actual producers, the associate producers, the thank you producers, the person who directs the pilot episode, whether or not they're involved with the show beyond that point. If they're a big name director, they often get like executive
producer.
Yeah, for the life
of the series, exactly.
Yeah, Adam McKay, and that usually comes with money attached, like $10,000, $20,000 every time their credit shows up on screen for the first time, and stuff like that. But a lot of the roles that are like ceremonial, as Lindsay mentioned, are actually a bit more defined in TV, where the writers get different levels of producer credit to designate like experience, and also that defines how you get paid for that job and future jobs. So like, in television, you would start as like a script coordinator or a writer's assistant. You would move up to like staff writer or story editor. Sometimes you'll get an episode out of that. But then there's like more roles on top of that, which is like associate producer, supervising producer, co-executive producer, which is usually the number 2 on a show, or executive producer. And then the showrunner often gets an executive producer credit. And if people are really funky with it, like you'll see some really ridiculous producer credits because people are very protective of their like hierarchical roles. If they're really precious, like you might get supervising co-EP. What the fuck does that mean? The supervising co-EP couldn't tell you. You know what I mean? But that's something that has been seen on TV before and stuff like that. And then in television, there's also the creative producer, which is not always a role, but like creative producers are often parallel to the showrunner in a way where it's like their job to sort out on TV shows. It's their job to help come up with creative solutions to problems. Oftentimes, they make decisions if the showrunner is not there. Or just like help manage a writer's room's worth of personnel and ideas when the show is actually in production and decisions need to be made on the day and stuff like that. And that's like a job that people get paid for that is very difficult because it's a lot of like ego management. It's a lot of like cooling people off. It's a lot of like, well, we can't do this with this time. And then like they're the ones who will talk to the showrunner about here's what we can do, and then the showrunner will talk to the director or the writer on set, and then the writer on set will go to the director, and then the director will have to explain to the actors. Like, you know, there's very good hierarchy in both film and television, but the way that's expressed with producing is extremely different.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think, Abdul, what you're talking about, that creative producer job title generally would be parallel to the capital P producer on a film set. However, that creative, because there's no such thing as a creative producer credit. So that person, I imagine, would be getting a producer credit. Is that right? Like just a producer, a standalone credit. Is that right?
Yeah, it would be either a standalone or an EP credit.
Or an EP credit, yeah.
Yeah, but that's like EP is not very ceremonial in TV very often, aside from like the director who directed the pilot or something like that, right?
Exactly. So it's actually hard to identify who did it, but ultimately TV seems like a larger team effort. I don't know, Leonard, if you want to talk about your experience as a supervising producer on a certain TV show that's about to go to camera.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. Like, I was like, I don't personally feel like I did any of that. Like, I mean, I think I was there for a lot of the beginning, and I shepherded some rooms, and I rewrote a bunch of stuff for free, and like I did because like the writers we had were not like producing things that were, you know, of a quality that was you could submit to a human, and so then. So it was like, yeah, so I did all that. And so then I felt like, I guess this is just like a makeup credit, you know, to like kind of to be like, yeah, just because you did that, you know, whatever, like we'll just give you this. That's how I felt about it. I was like, I don't know
I think the other thing with TV too is that like those producer credits they heavily denote how much you get paid and what your creative involvement in the process is. Like the general wisdom with television is if you have a choice between getting paid more or taking the producer credit, you take the producer credit because that means that the next gig, you'll get paid more. That means that people will look at you differently because they're like, oh, you've done this level of experience. Largely in TV too, like supervising, sometimes associate, but like supervising producers are also on set, which means they produce their own episodes, which means that they're the writer on set, making sure the script gets shot, certain shots get done by the director and stuff like that. Whereas in film, you know, it's all out the window. Like it largely sits very much on like the producer and the line producer to handle a majority of those tasks.
Yeah, but let's also mention, like, just like you were talking about with the Oscars, and I'm seeing it on my feed today because today, not to date this episode, but the Oscar nominees were announced. And there is like, with any awards, it's like people are really holding on to specific titles so they can get that nomination. So for instance, with Best Picture, really only the capital P producer gets that award. In fact, for the CSA, same thing. Co-producers, executive producers, they're not eligible for that award. So that's why you also see people like really, it gives them leverage on a project, and it also like allows them to be acknowledged when it comes to award season if a project feels like it's going to pivot towards awards.
And that's like sort of the big bones of producing. I think I do want to talk a bit more about the liability question, because like really producing is for all the jokes made about producers and them thinking of themselves as the creative role.
Hey, we decide who gets hired and who gets fired. That seems pretty creative to me. I feel like I'm creating art by doing that.
Yeah,
I feel that way when I make budgets. I feel like that's a creative process too, as silly as that sounds.
I'm sure it is if you're like autistic, but like the
shout out
the Mozart of spreadsheets, if you will.
Hell yeah.
The Kubrick of spreadsheets.
I'm really good.
The Kubrick stare. But I do think there is the one thing about producing is that there is a level of like liability, both for safety on set, which we've talked about, but then there's also the money side of the liability. You know, if you guys want to talk about that, like producers are in charge of money. Money does not come largely from the producers; it comes from outside sources. That's that like? What are the risks, upsides, benefits? Like what are you on the hook for, and what are you not?
I think, Shant, do you want to talk a bit about Canada? Sure. And actually, I could talk about the US, because I feel like this is an interesting part where we can kind of talk about how different those models are.
Definitely. I mean, most funding out of Canada is soft money. So the liability or the requirement that is required with the money is, as long as you fulfill the conditions, as long as the film or TV show is Canadian enough and is delivered at a good enough quality and makes it to air and is released to an audience theatrically for film or on TV for television, ultimately that is where the liability of the producer ends. I mean, certainly a producer has a motive, because in Canada, the producer owns the productions and owns the project. There is a certain motivation, commercial motivation for the producer to exploit the content beyond delivering it. But in Canada, it's very common for a producer to simply deliver a project, be like, it's delivered and it made it, I sent the kid to college. What else you want me to do? Like, you want me to get him a Nobel Peace Prize? I don't think that's going to happen. So
hey, they're just handing those out these days.
They're just handing those out these days.
But actually, you bring up a good point too with those projects, because it is also based on merit, right? Funding in Canada is merit based on the production company, their previous work, and the director for the most part. Do you want to talk a bit about like that track record? Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. So like, if you successfully brought your film or TV show out into the world and it achieved some sort of audience impact. On the film side, if you're talking about independent art house film, did it go to the Cannes Film Festival or TIFF? Did it sell? Did it make these things? And this does actually trail back to funding for your next project. Like, for example, with Canada Media Fund, they have Slate funding. If your previous TV shows were successful and successfully exported and sold, then you can record those receipts basically and say, look, I was successful with that. Give me some development funding. And it's the same way a little bit with telefilm, where there's some fast track applications of companies that have successfully released their films and have made it into the top tier of producers who have made some money with some audience impact, and then they get sort of automatic development funding basically for their next project. So there is that sort of merit element to it for sure. But from a project by project standpoint, there is not as much motive, let's say incentive or motivating incentive to exploit it to its greatest extent. Whereas if you have a private investor who's got money on the line, or it's your grandma's money or whatever, that their fingers on the scale and they're pressuring you to make money with this thing because they need to make money with this thing, then you face the private world. And I think this is a little bit different than the US and India. I'll talk about India a little bit, but Lindsay, you want to talk about the US?
I will
Let's talk.
just add a proviso that asking your grandmother for money for a movie is elder abuse.
I actually just had a meeting with a filmmaker who did just that, and it's a really good movie. So I think he did okay.
Was it called Grandma's Boy?
Yeah.
I can't. I feel like I shouldn't name it. But let's talk about the US, because we are also operating out of the US. So it's funny because when you're a producer who grows up in Canada, you think, oh, I have to work with, grants, art council money to get short films made, and then telefilm. And you're like, you get really used to this grant writing application. You come to America, you take meetings with directors, and they're like, so here's my project. You're going to finance my film, right? Because that's what a producer is in America. They're often the people who come with equity. So I want to give a little anecdote to when Shant and I were at the Venice Film Festival. We went to this party on a private island with these incredibly American.
St. James, just so you know.
We started with Weinstein, and now we're talking about private islands. What's happening?
Well, Venice is a city made of little islands, and this one just happened to be further away from where we were, and it was a party by these American filmmakers. We didn't know anything about them. I'm not going to name them, but I will say they worked on a film that was in competition at Venice, and it was a feature film, and they were this was a party to announce their production company. And when we met with these people, and I mean, Shant and I, we're talking about movies all day, our short films at Venice, we're yappa, movies. The second we start talking to these guys, they don't want to have conversations about movies we've watched. They're not creative people. They're business people who decided to put money into a film that happened to get to Venice, and then they poured a lot more money into this party. And it just felt like such an alienating feeling of oh my God, you're a producer on this film, but you clearly don't really give a shit about the creative of film, but you're here and you're monetized, you're
They care about the vanity.
They care about the red carpet, right? So there is this feeling of wow, that's a very different kind of producer than, the kind of production we see, or the kind of producers we see ourselves as. I'm not saying all American producers are like this, but the caveat is there is not federal financing for films in America. There's no state funding for films. You might get some artist grants here and there, but the overwhelming majority of independent films that get made in America are privately funded by someone the filmmaker knows, or it has nothing to do with merit, really. It has to do with who do you know who can help finance the film. And the decision to finance a film has a lot to do with, well, will I make my money back? Because these are private equity investors. They are first on a waterfall. So when the film eventually goes to theatrical, which is a funny thing to think about now because it's not really a thing anymore with indies, then ideally they're making their money back. And now we're seeing more deals where it's more important for a film investor to be an EP credit. Also, they get the ticket to Cannes. If the film goes to Cannes, it's more of a, like you said, Shant, a vanity piece, not so much a return on investment, because I think at this point, a lot of people understand you're not going to recoup on an indie film these days. So it's a very different model for funding in America.
Exactly. And so America has adopted, the overall independent film world has adopted this sort of mentality of glitz and glam, star power, red carpets, vanity, bragging rights, that kind of thing. That has become that sort of larger world of, or, I'm funding important films that are about poverty in Africa or something like that, basically. So that is American film financing generally. There are definitely people who are interested in, getting return on investment. And those are maybe producers who have larger production companies that are constantly cycling through multiple films, like a company like Black Bear or Voltage Pictures, or those kind of things that actually have a business model. They're running a business and they have means by which they run through money. Basically, the investors are generally people who are donating or not. They're investing, but they don't know if they're going to make their money back. And in some cases, they're particularly focused more on the vanity than they are on the return, although they would like to see a return. In India, however, the vanity part is somewhat skewed because there's a sort of weird class element to India, at least that I mean, there's certainly the element of like, oh, like I get to have like this big movie star on my set, or I get to like, my daughter gets to act in this film, and that kind of vanity stuff. But ultimately, because Indian films primarily do not participate in the glitz and glam of the Cannes Film Festival and Berlin and Sundance and all that kind of stuff, it's the minority of projects that end up actually going to those kind of more high profile spaces, and they have their own insular system of awards and red carpets and stuff like that. But ultimately, people who are financing films in India are industrialists and are expecting to make their money back. So it is actually a lot more of a commercial transaction in India, I found, than it is in America, because America has sort of just accepted the fact that our movies aren't going to make money because they're made for elites in New York and Los Angeles, basically. So that's producing in Canada, America, India, and the rest of the world, I think.
I have two questions for the producers before we wrap up. How does it feel being a failed director? No.
Actually, that's a really good... No, but you're touching on something really important. A lot of producers are multi-hyphenates. And I will say,
Yes.
Shant and I, not really.
Are not.
We just produce. But you will get a lot of producers who are like, I am an actor and a producer and a writer, or I'm a director and a producer, and that's cool. I just think I'm not good at directing, so I have no ambitions of that, or writing. So
Same here.
Find a producer who just wants to produce, maybe. I don't know.
On the TV side, I will say a lot of writers are starting to be their own producers, at least at the inception of a project, because they kind of necessarily have to. But even more important than that, Lindsay, what have you been watching this week?
Oh my gosh.
What have you been consuming? What have you been digging up from the mines of slop and art?
I was on a
nice platter, yeah.
I was on a shoot last week, so I'm so skewed because I'm still wrapping. So I haven't had a ton of time to watch anything, but I have prepared for a job coming up, and I can talk about, I work with Letterboxd a bunch, and so I saw 28 years later, The Bone Temple, and I did a content capture at that screening, which was super fun because all my favorite movie TikTokers were there, and Nia DaCosta. It was awesome. I really loved the film. I thought it was a really fun follow-up to the first one. Fun, not so much.
Night.
Horse dung.
Yeah. Well, it's a little smaller in this one.
Did they actually?
Notably smaller.
Yeah. I did not notice that.
It was cold. The water was cold.
I thought the movie was amazing, but like, man, that is one prosthetic dong, I will say.
It's like flying in the wind. It's a little smaller in this one for those who are hoping to see the horse dong again, but still a really great time. I could watch Ralph Fiennes paint a wall, and I'd have a good time. And Nia DaCosta is so fucking talented. Sorry for swearing. I just think what a great choice having her direct that film. And I think she's doing the last one too. I thought it was excellent.
Yeah, I will say that movie was genuinely amazing. And yeah, I mean, that's our episode.
And with that, we'll see you next week.